The Montreal REM Express metro system is finally open, and getting on board means going through one of the city's 5 new rapid transit stations. So in this video, I want to take you for a whirlwind tour of Montreal's newest stations, some of their special features, and the neighborhoods and places they're going to be opening up to new rail transit. Make sure you're subscribed and you turn on notifications too, because I'm going to have even more REM videos in the near future. We'll start our tour naturally at Central Station, and I must say the first thing I find really interesting here is how much of the old platform access has been retained. It's not like most rapid transit lines connected to a major station, and there isn't a separate building dedicated to serving the new route. Instead, the REM just serves regular, albeit heavily upgraded platforms within the historic station complex. From the main train hall, the REM platform mostly looks like any other platform, besides the additional escalators at the south end of the hall. Of course, it's really something special once you get onto it, as it's an enormous space with retained structural cross braces and some other less obvious historic features, as well as giant circular benches you can sit on while waiting for your friends or your train. It's pretty uncommon that you'd actually meet someone on a train platform in my experience, because platforms tend to be small and crowded, but the space here is expansive. It's clearly built for huge capacity, and that's good to see. I can totally imagine people meeting here before heading to the airport or the South Shore on the REM. I also do love that the floor over the filled-in tracks was colored a deep gray, as a reminder of the modifications which were made here, and the exposed cables and pipes on the ceiling behind grates, which are apparently meant to evoke the underground location and the infrastructure beneath Montreal. Access to the main platform is also rather interesting, as it's mostly done via the ends, where I imagine faregates will also be installed in the long term, which should only contribute to high capacity, with entrances on the Central Station end to the north that also has a customer service center, and on the south end to Place Bonaventure, which is probably going to be the low-key fastest way to access the metro. Now, if you're really nerdy, you're probably wondering what the track layout for Central Station, which has tracks numbering from 4 to 23, is now that the REM has gone in. The new REM space has taken over the former tracks 9, 10, 11, and 12, with tracks 10 and 11 filled in for the new, larger, wide REM platform. And there are actually 3 platformless tracks and 2 additional platform tracks to the west of the REM platform, which have been transferred to the REM for storage of around 10 trains. This might come in handy for deploying extra trains quickly during a busy event, or if a train needs to be taken out of service. To the east of the REM tracks are an additional 5 island platforms and 1 side platform, with a total of 11 more tracks, which will continue to serve EXO, Amtrak, and Via Train. The approach to Central Station has also been reshuffled, and the difference in condition between the REM section and the mainline train section is quite striking. The REM obviously has 2 tracks on the southern approach to the station, while the mainline trains narrow down to 2 tracks, though it does look like there might be room to widen that to 4 if service requires it in the long term. For a while, trains will actually be boarding on both sides of the station, as it acts as a temporary terminus, and this might be part of why service on the REM is starting at every 3 to 7 minutes instead of the promised every 2 to 5 minutes. There just isn't the capacity to turn around that many trains at Central Station, as in the long term, all services will continue north through the Mount Royal Tunnel. That being said, a really cool feature of Central Station on the REM is that trains approach at high speed, which they do not on the mainline tracks. The other thing which I think bears mentioning, and you would have heard this if you saw my REM opening video, which I'll link if you haven't seen, is that Central Station is the only climate-controlled station on the first segment of the project. On the day we filmed, there was crazy heat and humidity, but stepping into Central Station was cool and dry, and that was really nice. The one rough spot for the station is the inevitably long connection to the metro here, which isn't called Central Station for a reason. It's a bit of a hike and takes about 5 minutes, though it may be a bit faster via the southern connection through Place Bonaventure. Of course, that's nothing new and just the reality of siting a station here. So that's Central Station. Heading down the line, this video would include Griffintown Station, but work has barely started on it. On a positive note, that should give us a good sense of how long building and commissioning an infill station along the already operating line takes though, something which I expect to happen a lot as areas around the REM develop. There's already been talk about adding one somewhere in Point St. Charles. I must say, while on paper Griffintown Station does feel very close to Central Station, it's still about half a kilometer away, and a longer walk than you might imagine. In practice, I think having a rapid transit connection here will be very useful, as the metro really kind of skirts the area despite all of the development. I'm curious to see if it manages to spur even more density as well. What's really interesting about the station is its location on the rail approach to Central Station, which will give it a half above, half below ground feeling. I must say, even if not via REM-style lines, more cities in North America, including Toronto, should take advantage of the tracks heading into their central stations to serve dense new development that often occurs in these areas. I'll also say that the cantilevered overhead wires and fencing are interesting to see. Remember, the REM is fully automated, which means keeping people off the tracks isn't just important, it's very much life or death. And it's interesting to see how such a long system manages right-of-way security. On the Champlain Bridge, for example, the barrier is very low between the car travel lanes and the REM, but that's a bit of an optical illusion because there is a pretty big air gap. Now, speaking of the Champlain Bridge, the other currently open Montreal station is on Nuns Island, which I'll be honest, I had barely spent any time on before making all of these REM videos, and wow, it's pretty cool. I know it's a bit of an enclave, but I appreciate the mix of uses, the density, and the surprisingly nice Bell campus, and the bike and walking paths everywhere, as well as lots of quiet neighborhood streets. I think this is without a doubt probably the best place to take pictures and video of the REM, as it glides over Montreal's waterways, but also a good reminder that the REM doesn't just serve traditional suburbs. Now, the station here is also actually really useful as a piece of human transport infrastructure in and of itself, even if you're not getting on the REM, because at the moment the north and south of the island are divided by the approach ramps to the Champlain Bridge, while the new station will open a big new connecting plaza you can walk through. This would have been super nice while filming this video in the heat and having to walk all the way around. This location also makes the station kind of interesting as a drop-off point right at the bridge, so if you haven't walked or cycled across it, it will be a lot easier to do so, as well as check out one of the various city viewpoints on it when the REM opens. In this way, I really hope the REM can open this cool part of the city to the entire region. The station itself is actually quite unique, as the only one in the first phase not to have an island platform, and like Central Station, it's also blessed with escalators, which you'll want to use because it's a bit of a climb from the common entrance area to the platforms, though you might want to spend an extra moment in the common area to enjoy the lovely white tile work. Getting back on the train, we cross the Champlain Bridge and head to our next stop, Panama, which is possibly the most boring station open so far. Sorry Panama, or is it? The station is rather unique in that there isn't all that much around it right now. No train yard, no high density, no island stuff, but what it does have is a pretty big bus terminal, which will connect passengers using buses from RTL and EXO onto the REM, which sits in the middle of the A10 auto route that many of the buses used to use to hop downtown. Speaking of the bus terminal, it's really an exercise in minimalism. Besides the giant 3-wing design that features over 20 bus platforms, the terminal also has a weather-protected walkway to the REM and lots of next bus screens, so while it's not quite as nice as the terminus of the Yellow Line in Longueuil, it's still pretty nice. At the same time, the potential for this station is huge. There are already plans for a downtown Brassard in the area, and while there are lots of parking lots, where you see parking lots, I see future high-density transit-oriented communities. And I was quite impressed how many bike paths already existed in the area. Better yet, Panama is likely to become an even bigger transit interchange with the future tram or REM service that has long been talked about along Taschereau Boulevard, which Panama Station is directly adjacent to. And I think that's really the lens you need to look at these suburban stations through. Some of the Canada Line stations in Vancouver felt like they were in downright industrial areas when they opened, and they're now home to some really nice dense walkable communities. And given Montreal is larger than Vancouver, and the REM is a much larger system than the Canada Line, there's no good reason that transformation here can't be even bigger. That being said, by no means are Montreal's South Shore suburbs Phoenix or Los Angeles. There is a decent existing bus service here and a surprising amount of cycling infrastructure. So much so that Paige Saunders was able to pretty comfortably bike down here to visit me on the South Shore for ice cream on a route that was both pretty direct and mostly on good cycle paths. So to suggest these places are starting from zero with the REM wouldn't be fair. Moving along the line, we arrive at Du Quartier, which is already surrounded by shops and services. Most of these are very suburban and car-oriented, but the new Solar Unicartier development, which I talked about in my REM opening video, shows how these sites can be made much denser, more pedestrian-friendly, and incorporate even more uses, such as office space. It's also a great example of doing development and transit expansion in concert, something I discussed in a previous video. Plus, most everyone gets an awesome view of the REM trains passing by every few minutes. The Marriott here may become Montreal's prime railfan hotel because of this, and I actually stayed here on some of the filming trips for the REM. It's a great spot for folks who might drive into town for one reason or another, but who make the rational choice to take transit into the city, which will take less than 20 minutes. It's also great that the development has a direct indoor connection to the REM, so for many riders you can make the journey from home to your final destination near Ducartier in complete warmth in the wintertime. One thing I was a little bothered with the station was that at one point it seemed like there wasn't going to be a connection to the road overpass to the north of the station. Such misconnections are common in a lot of transit projects in Toronto. But fortunately, nope, they thought of that, and I was pleasantly surprised to see an entrance here, which like all entrances on the REM is given a letter for easier navigation. Just meet me at entrance A, you could say. We also saw some of the first new fare gates in the city going in here, which was awesome. These new fare gates will likely support contactless credit and debit payments, are more accessible, and unlike turnstiles, aren't liable to injure you when you walk into them. I'll be curious to see if they start showing up in the Montreal Metro at some point. The last thing that seems obvious to me is an infill station, just about a kilometer north of Ducartier. This would enable the redevelopment of the rest of the big box retail and a major former park and ride in this area, potentially creating a large, dense urban village surrounding the two stations and flowing from one to the other. In general, there is a lot of potential for infill stations on the REM, and I think they'll get built as new neighborhoods develop along the line. The last station on the first leg of the REM is Brassard, which is unique and interesting for a few reasons. For one, Brassard has 3 platforms, which is rather unique not just in Montreal, but in Canada in general. This should help with bringing trains into and out of service, as well as handling the extremely high 90-second frequencies the REM is capable of one day. For now, terminal operations happen with trains unloading on the side platform, then turning around in the overrun tracks before heading back into the city via the island platform. Aesthetically, like the other REM stations, I must say I appreciate the tiling and station design. There is still concrete, but they could have just made everything concrete, and the use of warm yellow tiles gives the station a distinctive pop of color. The station is also rather unique in having 3 levels, one for entrances, one for circulation between platforms, and one for the platforms themselves. And like other stations on the South Shore, there are no escalators here, although the connection to Ducartier within the Solar Unicartier development does have them. Oh, also, fun, I forgot the compass's weird in Montreal fact, despite being on the South Shore, Brassard is now the easternmost rapid transit station in Canada, and in fact the whole South Shore branch is further east than any existing Montreal Metro station. Now, why would trains be going out of service at Brassard? Well, because Brassard has a large rail yard, where train cleaning and maintenance will happen, and is the location for the operations center for the REM, where the entire network will be controlled. What you might not know, and what isn't all that well advertised, is that the REM has a lot of yards. There is the one in Brassard, and there's also more or less a yard at Central Station, as I said earlier. Outside of the first phase of the project, there's also a small servicing yard at the end of the West Island branch, and a larger yard at the end of the Dumontan branch. Having so many yards helps with spreading the load of storing and maintaining the large fleet of trains that will be used on the REM. But they also mean less deadheading or running out of service to and from yards at the beginning and end of service, which is a part of why I would guess service on the REM runs later than on the Metro, pretty much across the board, including nearly an hour later on weekends. Brassard is also cool because it has a really big U-shaped bus terminal, akin to the one at Panama, that also has nearly 20 bus bays, which should allow buses on the nearby highways and from communities like Chambly to drop riders off at the REM for a quick, reliable trip into the city. Across from the bus terminal, there's also supposed to eventually be a fairly large park, which will give the station some destination value, besides for workers operating trains. Now, a lot of people have taken issue with the massive amount of parking at this station, which is not unreasonable. But ultimately, I'm not really sure the land in the loop of tracks connecting the station to the yard was likely to be turned into any kind of other development, given the proximity to the greenbelt and highways as well as the rail yard. And in some sense, this leaves the space up for grabs should the yard need to expand to handle more trains in the future. At the same time, in the long term, Brassard should be able to be the only park and ride station on this leg of the REM. And it can play that role well with its location near the interchange of 2 highways, similar to how Ducartier can accommodate longer-term visitors to the city. Something a bit more positive is that there are a ton of parking spots which feature EV chargers, and I have to say I'm impressed in general with how many EVs are driving around Quebec. All in all, I was quite impressed with how large and modern the stations on the REM are, especially as most of the media still insists on referring to the project as light rail, which it clearly isn't. This is an expansion of new metro into different parts of Montreal and its suburbs, and what's clear is that there is already a lot in motion around the various stations and the potential is huge. It's really in the hands of the cities now to create the density and transit supportive policies that will get people using the REM en masse. And that's even more important because unlike to the north of the mountain, all trains serve the South Shore stations, Nuns Island and Griffintown. I guess all that's left now is to get on board. Thanks for watching.
you.